Why giving money to Africa makes it poor. For decades, the world has poured trillions of dollars into Africa through aid programs, development loans, humanitarian missions, and countless charitable projects. Yet despite this flood of generosity, much of the continent remains trapped in poverty. Why is that? Why has a region so rich in natural resources, gold, oil, diamonds, fertile soil, and human potential, continued to struggle? The uncomfortable truth is that foreign aid, when misused or misstructured, can create dependency rather than development. Instead of empowering local economies, it can weaken them. Instead of fostering innovation, it can erode self-sufficiency. And instead of breaking the cycle of poverty, it can make it permanent. This paradox in that giving money can make a nation poorer is one of the most misunderstood realities of modern economics. Let's explore why. The noble idea that went wrong. After World War II, Western powers, inspired by the success of the Marshall Plan in rebuilding Europe, believed similar strategies could help poorer regions. Billions in aid began flowing to newly independent African nations in the 1960s. At first, the idea seemed noble. Help nations build roads, hospitals, schools, and modern industries. But the Marshall Plan worked in Europe because the recipients already had strong institutions, functioning governments, and skilled labor forces. Aid as an addiction. When aid becomes predictable and permanent, it can act like a drug, numbing initiative and distorting priorities. Governments that rely on foreign assistance often don't need to tax their citizens to fund development. Without that taxpayer accountability, leaders don't have the same pressure to govern responsibly or efficiently. Economist Dambisa Moyo, in her book Debt Aid, famously called this cycle the disease of dependency. She argued that when a country's budget comes from donors rather than its own people, corruption flourishes, innovation dies, and long-term progress stalls. Why reform an economy, diversify industries, or invest in local enterprise when billions keep flowing in from abroad? Over time, entire ministries, NGOs, and local bureaucracies grow around the aid economy, not the real economy. Corruption, the hidden cost of generosity. Money doesn't just build schools and hospitals, it also builds empires of corruption. When vast sums of unmonitored aid enter fragile political systems, they often disappear before reaching the people. In many cases, donor nations have known this but looked away. Aid was often tied to political loyalty. Cold War, alliances, natural resource access, or diplomatic convenience. As a result, aid money frequently enriched elites while the poor saw little improvement. Expensive development projects turned into half-built roads or empty clinics. Even when donors tried to impose conditions or oversight, aid bureaucracies often became parallel governments, bypassing local accountability entirely. The result? African citizens learned to look to donors, not their own leaders, for solutions. The market distortion problem. There's another unintended consequence. Free money distorts local markets. Imagine a small farmer growing maize in Kenya. Then a Western charity arrives and donates free maize to local villages as part of a hunger relief effort. It sounds kind and necessary. But what happens next? Local farmers can't compete with free. Their crops rot unsold. Their income vanishes. Many give up farming altogether. When the aid shipment ends, the community has lost its food producers and now truly depends on foreign supplies. This has happened repeatedly with food aid, clothing donations, and even medical supplies. What begins as compassion ends as economic disruption. Loans, not gifts. The debt trap. Not all aid is free. Much of it comes as loans, often on terms that developing nations cannot realistically meet. During the 1970s and 1980s, African nations borrowed heavily for infrastructure projects. When global interest rates rose, repayment became impossible. The result, a debt crisis. By the 1990s, some countries were spending more on debt repayments than on healthcare or education. This is how development turned into dependence. Foreign NGOs and the white savior complex. Another challenge lies in the aid delivery system itself. Thousands of foreign NGOs operate in Africa, often with the best of intentions, but their presence can unintentionally weaken local governments. When an NGO provides healthcare, builds schools, or manages water projects, citizens start depending on outsiders instead of demanding performance from their own leaders. The brain drain effect. Ironically, the flood of aid jobs has sometimes drawn Africa's best minds away from local entrepreneurship. Talented young professionals often prefer working for NGOs, UN agencies, or donor-funded programs because they pay far better than local companies or government jobs. This diverts talent from productive sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, or technology, where sustainable growth actually happens. In effect, the aid industry creates a parallel elite, well-paid but disconnected from local realities. The result is a fragmented economy, one that thrives on donor money, not innovation or production. The psychological impact from pride to dependency. Economics aside, constant aid can reshape national psychology. When help always comes from outside, it subtly sends the message, you can't do it on your own. Over generations, this breeds dependency, low confidence, and even resentment when aid works and when it doesn't. Not all aid is bad. In times of crisis, famine, war, natural disaster, immediate humanitarian aid can save lives. And some targeted programs have succeeded, eradicating diseases, expanding vaccination, improving education for girls, or providing clean water. The difference is in structure and purpose, the rise of a new model, trade over aid. In recent years, a quiet revolution has begun. African leaders, economists, and youth movements are increasingly rejecting the aid narrative. Instead, they're demanding investment, trade, and partnership. Africa doesn't lack potential. It has 60% of the world's arable land, a young and growing population, and booming urban markets. The real path to prosperity. So what does true progress look like? It begins with self-reliance, good governance, and economic freedom. When countries strengthen institutions, reduce corruption, and create environments where citizens can thrive independently, prosperity follows. This means empowering farmers with technology, supporting entrepreneurs with access to credit, and building industries that add value locally, instead of exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. From charity to partnership. Giving money to Africa doesn't inherently make it poor. Badly structured aid does. When aid fosters dependence, fuels corruption, and distorts local economies, it traps nations in poverty. But when support is designed to empower, educate, and enable independence, it can catalyze growth. The future lies in equal partnership, not perpetual charity. Africa doesn't need saving. It needs space to build, innovate, and trade on its own terms.